were able to grow the business over the first 5 years, and then we just sort of plateaued and we stayed below a $2 million a year top line revenue company for a long time. We've been in business for 17 years, but we've doubled in size each year of the last 3 years. And colleagues of mine, EO peer group members, they'll ask me, well, what unlocked the growth? And the first thing that had to happen is we had to decide as business owners that we wanted the company to be more than a lifestyle company. We wanted to grow the business as an asset, and that changes the way that you think about the business. The very next thing that happened is we had to look hard at the business, the market that we served, our customers, ourselves specifically, and our skill sets. What were we lacking as leaders in the organization? Maybe what were we doing the wrong things day to day?
This is episode 227 of the We Live to Build podcast. Our guest today is the partner and CEO of Red Hawk Technologies, Matt Strippelhoff. And it is an American software development firm that helps companies develop complex applications. And in this conversation, we talk a lot about AI and business processes and growth and lessons learned in the process of growing our businesses and changing ourselves so that we can adapt so our businesses can grow. If you're looking at software or AI, this is a great conversation for you. Let's get to it. What made you want to get into software development?
Started out in my career as a graphic designer, and this is just when the internet started taking off. Graduated from the Art Academy of Cincinnati with a BFA in communication design. So I had this inclination to create and be a designer, and thought I wanted to be a fine artist, but I didn't want to be a starving artist. So I focused on communication design, which led me down the path of working for small graphic design studios and agencies in the greater Cincinnati region. But I produced my first website in 1994 using Netscape Navigator. That browser actually had development tools built into it. We didn't have what you see is what you get editors. We didn't have all these powerful tools that developers have today. So I learned how to do coding just to create some interesting visual effects and produced a website for the agency that I worked for at the time. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. It's kind of taking sort of a science, techie kind of a mindset and combining that with the arts to create some experience for the end user. And that led me down that path. And before I knew it, I was designing user interfaces for complex web applications a few years later.
I learned how to code HTML, not like terribly proficiently, but like, breaking lines and changing font colors and sizes and weights and margins and padding and, these kinds of things. I know some of that gets into the CSS. I got involved with that probably high school. It's like late 90s. And I took a I took a C++ class in high school because my brother convinced the tech teacher for the school that I already knew Visual Basic, that he taught me it, but he hadn't. And I only passed the C++ class because I copied off of my friends, because I actually was not interested in coding. I knew from a very early age I didn't really care. My actual goal was to get into the networking class, which was an elite club that the teacher managed of students. And our goal was to make sure the entire network of 1,400 computers in our school were working properly. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. It got really deep into hardware and networking standards and LAN cards, because we didn't have wireless or Bluetooth or anything like that yet. But then instead of going into computers, I went into psychology, because I was like, I learned so much about tech that I know I don't want a career in tech. Because in my mind, it was all about coding, which was boring, and networking, which is hard to do because of all the problems. There's constantly problems, right? It's never like everything is working smoothly. There's something is always breaking. So I didn't want to do that. So you get into software development. You've been in software development for 20-ish years. How have you seen it change And I guess that's more towards now where AI is coming out and being more relevant in the process.
The pace of change right now is insane. I'll just say that it was a little bit of a we saw a lot of progression in those early 90s to late 90s when tools started coming out into the marketplace to make it easier for designers to code. you know what you see is what you get. Editors, the Dreamweaver tools, Microsoft Front Page was an early iteration of a what you see is what you get editor. And those tools were meant to expedite the development process by removing the need to manually code a lot of stuff. If you think about it, it's a lot of editors that gave you the ability to affect or implement CSS and styles and templates and stuff to make it faster to produce what you wanted the user experience to be. The same thing was happening on the back end, but that's not the world that I came from. I was more on the front end design and engineering side of things. So today, I think what we're seeing is just the pace of which AI tools are now coming out to basically do the same things to expedite the development process. But now instead of utilities, in a control panel or dashboard that you're using to put things together where it's doing the coding behind the scenes based on what you're clicking and what you're selecting. Now you've got natural language prompts that you're using through these AI tools to generate code, which is pretty fascinating. So that's definitely going to have a big impact on the business as we continue to grow.
I used Dreamweaver and Front Page a long time ago, and then it was kind of replaced by LiveJournal, which was then replaced by WordPress. And I've used WordPress since its early days. And then I got like Divi theme, which has been really helpful for moving element blocks around. But you still have to code. You don't have to code because it's visual, but there's still a lot of tweaks you have to do. You still have to pay someone to design your website or something like that. And then when I got into my own tech company, I got into Figma, which was really cool for designing stuff. And they can give you the code and you just copy the assets and give the code to your tech team. And now I'm able to code entire front ends and back ends with natural language prompts using a tool called Lovable, which I mentioned to you previously. And as a non-technical person who's not a designer, not a coder, but has visions, I can imagine businesses, but before I'd have to hire people and spend a lot of money. Now I'm capable of doing it all myself. And if I had access to these tools when I had started my tech company 5-6 years ago, it would have been far faster and far cheaper to get anything done. Like shockingly so for me. The difference in just a few years is huge. How are you using AI in your business? How are you thinking about it?
My role in the company as CEO and driving the growth and strategy, we think about AI a lot. I think about it, I'm sure, very differently than the boots on the ground, the engineering team, the principal engineers who are driving what tools that we're using. So I can speak a little bit about what they're doing in the trenches right now. We're using a lot of proven AI solutions like Microsoft Copilot. There are a few others that we're using as well that ride along as an agent. It helps them expedite the process of writing code. They can review and approve and decide what they're going to use, what they're not going to use. And we're doing some really clever, simple things. One of the things that that's helped us grow quite a bit as a business is that we take on support, maintenance, and enhancements of custom business applications that clients have previously invested in, either using internal resources or other developers. And documentation has always been a massive problem in the software engineering space. Agile comes in, people think that means you don't have to document things. True Agile practitioners, Scrum-Bond, they know documentation is important. They figure out what the right balance is. But the lack of documentation that we see in the industry is pretty crazy. So we can use AI prompts and actually understand the code and have it generate comments for us to help us understand what's happening in somebody else's code. So that's really helpful. On the flip side, sometimes we'll actually write a prompt as if we're writing a comment. We need a function that does X, Y, and Z, and that's how we'll prompt the AI tool to write the code. And so it's an interesting way of thinking about using prompts. Sometimes it's understanding existing code. Sometimes it's to generate new code. Most conversations like this, we're talking about expediting the generation of new code.
That's what I found for myself using Lovable, because I started out prompting it, and then I'd realize that something was missing or something was broken, and I'd have to go and ask it, "Hey, I asked you to do this thing, but part of it isn't working. Can you tell me why it's not working?" And it'll go, "Well, based on your request, I've checked all of the files and I can see there might be a problem here and here and here. So let me address them and let's see if that fixes the problem." And it'll, "Do you want me to do that?" Or it'll just say, "I'm going to do that." And you go, "All right, fine." And it does it. And so as I'm creating, I can go back and make changes. I can reverse the changes if they didn't work or if it broke something else, which does happen sometimes. Um, or like I wanted to change something and then it broke something that was already fine. It's like, why? Sometimes I had to go into the database and clear the database in order to, to clear the tables in order to make the function work again. If I've added another column to the database, it breaks the database. So, or on the front end. So I have enough technical knowledge that I can do it myself, where someone without my knowledge at all would probably suffer to do it. But I can go, "Hey, I told you to change from a sequential ordering system for the reports to an alphanumeric that has 8 characters, but I noticed that it's not working correctly. Is it possible that the relationship between the databases got messed up in the switchover?" And I go, "Let me check." Like, a lot of non-technical people wouldn't think to ask those questions. So luckily for me, I have that experience dealing with my former company, um, but nonetheless, I can pull documentation. I can ask it questions. I can suggest changes. I can request reversions. Reversions? It's not even a word. I can request to reverse the changes. So I find it to be extremely helpful in every way, and I think that documentation side is the most important, as well as the generation of new code.
You have to know what to ask. You have to go beyond what the business concept is. I want an application that does X, Y, and Z. I'm going to ask for these features in sequence. It's going to write the code for me. But when you're thinking about what the larger implications are, what are you actually creating? Is this going to be a commercial multi-tenant software application that is a SaaS product? Are you going to have to deal with HIPAA compliance regulations, GDPR regulations? The level of complexity that can be introduced based on what it is that you're producing will determine how and where AI will be useful in the project. So when I think about things like this, we oftentimes will describe to our customers as we're gathering requirements, understanding what their intent is. We first want to know what the business value is that's going to be generated and what their larger vision is so that we can help guide them. We need to be a Sherpa on this journey on behalf of the customer. So even if we're using AI tools, we still need to really be leaning in and thinking about, okay, well, based on the level of complexity and what we're doing here, what is maintenance going to look like in the future? How do we de-risk the investment? We'll start working out details around the architecture. We probably need a business logic layer that's actually separate from the code. So your business logic is not programmed into the front end user experience, that presentation layer. Because if it's programmed into the presentation layer, then you're going to have all kinds of challenges changing things based on maybe changing requirements within the business. Because you can't just go to the business logic layer and make changes there. You got to figure out everywhere that business requirement was programmed into the solution. So we're leaning in on AI, but we're also very cautious about the decisions that AI is making because it will take your natural language prompts very directly. It's not going to ask probing questions back to you. It's not, well, I understand what you're asking, but let's talk about the larger picture here. How frequently do you expect things to change? Are there factors outside of your business that might drive change in the logic that's underlying the underlying logic in this overall application? And then come back and say, okay, based on your answers, the AI is not going to come back and say, well, then we need a business logic layer. It's not really doing the architecture. It's generating the code. But these are things that we need to talk about, I think, in the industry in general. It's like, okay, what is it actually producing? Is it architecting it in a way that what it's producing is sustainable and scalable? Where is the business logic being programmed? Is it an interface? Is it a separate layer? How are the APIs being handled when you want it to integrate with third-party solutions? How's it handling those types of decisions? I don't know the answers to those questions. I'm sure it's probably different based on each tool, but these are things that I think about a lot.
What about the legality of using these tools?
But a lot of these tools are prompt engines that sit on top of large language models. What is it taking from from what you're giving it and pushing out there to those large language models? Is it doing it in a way that your IP is protected? That would be a concern. I wouldn't want to be pursuing a multi-million-dollar idea using a low-code AI solution without knowing if that big idea is now part of the ecosystem. I would want to know things like that. I would also want to know what packages, frameworks, and open source plugins are being used and what licensing risks are introduced into the platform. Again, when you're working with experienced professionals who build commercial solutions, they're going to help you along that journey because as a client, our clients, they're not in the software engineering space. They don't know what a software bill of materials is. We have to educate them. It's just like a manufacturing bill of materials. It's the makeup of that solution. And open source software licenses can vary dramatically. Some of them have what we refer to as a copy left requirement, meaning that if you use their open source in your solution, you have to make whatever you develop available to the open source community. That's not a great thing if you're creating a SaaS product that you want people to pay to use, and all of a sudden you can't charge for it because it has to be open source. So and that's a problem that we've seen in engineering in the past, even before AI, especially with mid-market clients that will maybe choose offshore teams to do development. And this isn't a knock on offshore. There's a lot of great offshore teams out there. It's just if you don't know what questions to ask or how to protect yourself, you don't always know what's going into the ingredients, the cake that they're baking for you. And if they're not asking you the right questions, they might introduce open source software components, packages, frameworks, et cetera, that have copy left without even realizing it. So we're very aware of lawsuits and challenges that have happened out there in the marketplace because of the ingredients that engineers chose to use. So from a legality perspective, what are the AI agents choosing to use? Or are they just writing everything from scratch? And I think that's going to vary from tool to tool. I think that it's really important for people interested in using these low-code solutions to take the time to understand if they're able to protect their IP. Are they able to protect their code? Is there a risk of open source software licensing risks being introduced into your code base? How are the API integrations handled? Are they in a separate layer? How's the business logic handled? Things like that. But these are hard questions.
I feel like you could ask AI this question.
You might be able to. It may be able to give you very specific information. But if it's generative by nature, you also have to be careful about the accuracy of the response. So it might be better to look at the actual the written terms and conditions, and not rely on the AI solution to give you the answer. It's probably a good place to start.
I wonder if I could spit the terms and conditions into an AI and have it analyze it for me.
You absolutely can. We've done that. We're a Google Workspace company primarily, so we use Google Drive and Workspace. Gemini is great at that. We can drop stuff in there, and I use it. For example, if a client gives me what they might consider a fairly detailed spec, I'm thinking about creating X. I'll submit that in through Gemini through our paid account so that it's all compartmentalized. It's not going out there into the ether. But I'll ask it to just take a first pass at producing features and user stories with descriptions and acceptance criteria, as if we're going to take that documentation and drop it right into a backlog and do a Scrum Agile project. And it'll do a pretty good job, but at least gives me a good idea of the rough order of magnitude of what it is we're being asked to produce. I can refine that, take that back to the client. That's another way that I'm using AI in the business. So you could do that with terms and conditions. You could ask it questions about that specific document.
I remember handwriting all of that because AI didn't exist 6 years ago in that capacity. It was a huge headache because the feature specifications didn't always match what was in Figma, didn't always match what was in the application or in the documentation. And so we would constantly have fights about what is the source of truth. In my mind, I'm the source of truth because it's my vision. All of the ideas and all of the features and all of the design are coming from me. You're just implementing it. Of course, I'm explaining why we're doing this and all that, right? So there's emotional buy-in and everything, but essentially it's all coming from me. And yet the CTO was like, well, the source of truth should be the documentation. I go, well, I'm providing the documentation. He's like, yeah, but why is the app not doing what the documentation says? Or why do your designs not fit the documentation you're submitting? It's like, oh my God, if we had something that could generate the source of truth, then the QA team and the product team and the tech team would all be aligned. And so everything would appear as it should. And if it doesn't, it has to be fixed. That was like, I have PTSD from this, honestly. So, what are some issues you've come across as a business owner in trying to grow this business?
My business partner and I, we started the company in 2008. High performers in our specific roles in prior organizations, some experience working together for many years. So we decided that we would start our own business, do it better than anybody else. And we rapidly grew, but then we reached a threshold. And I guess it's the threshold is the challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs are going to run into. We were able to grow the business over the first 5 years, and then we just sort of plateaued and we stayed below a $2 million a year top line revenue company for a long time. We've been in business for 17 years, but we've doubled in size each year of the last 3 years. And colleagues of mine, EO peer group members, they'll ask me, well, what unlocked the growth? And the first thing that had to happen is we had to decide as business owners that we wanted the company to be more than a lifestyle company. We wanted to grow the business as an asset, and that changes the way that you think about the business. The very next thing that happened is we had to look hard at the business, the market that we served, our customers, ourselves specifically, and our skill sets. What were we lacking as leaders in the organization? Maybe what were we doing the wrong things day to day? And so that revealed to us, and it wasn't, we had some other folks, I had coaches talk to me about this, and others recognized it before I did. And we all have blind spots as business owners and entrepreneurs. My blind spot was that I probably need to be focused on evangelizing the brand, on building relationships, and not be in the day-to-day operations of the business. So we sort of had this consultant's dilemma, which I'm sure you're very aware of, where you will sell and then you get the work and you do the work and then you're doing the work, so you're not selling. And so you have this little bit of a roller coaster ride. And that was the way that Red Hawk was going, because I was the one who was primarily generating the new opportunities with clients. So my business partner had to step in and just say, okay, I own all operations. You just need to be outward facing, building relationships, drive the vision of the business. And we did come up with a unique model for the business as well, which helped unlock growth. But we also had another challenge, and that challenge was neither myself nor my business partner had the deep financial experience like a true CFO. We didn't have the experience of successfully building businesses beyond what we had built ourselves. And we needed to bring in additional leadership. We needed a true COO, CFO. And we were fortunate enough to find the right person for that. Now, the challenge that happens once you find someone like that, they generally want to share in the growth and the value of the business. So then as a business owner, you have to be willing to share that. You got to give them a path forward to where they're going to benefit from helping you unlock that growth. So we had to embrace the idea of bringing in another partner, which we did. And so we had to get a lot of things right. But I guess going back to the very beginning of that, answering that question, we had to realize what we were getting wrong. and we had to embrace where we needed to bring in some additional skills from others, and we had to change our the way we're thinking about finances within the business as well. And sometimes I catch myself still having this smaller business mindset instead of a big business mindset and how revenue and cash flow works. And so it's interesting now to start to say, oh yeah, okay, I get it. Yeah, I need to be comfortable. I need to lean into some of these things. But as a result, we've doubled in size each year the past 3 years, and we're on track to double again this year. I'm knocking on wood. I'm hoping it's going to go according to plan.
I specialize in finding problems and pointing them out to people. I have a friend who's run a business for 13 years, and they also hit a plateau, and I was able to spot from a mile away because he will tell me all of the issues they're going through and what they're working on and all of that. I've known him for 27 years, 28 years. So I've known him since before the business started, and I would tell him for years, like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. I go, you're the one preventing your business from growing. There's a problem in the marketing. So he kicks out the marketing person and he takes over marketing. Go maybe for a few months, fine, clean it up, create some documentation processes, then find someone and get out of the way. So then sales has a problem. Then design / product has a problem, and he comes in and he takes over those. I go, you're doing the wrong thing. You're not supposed to be taking over these problems. You should, like, sure, fine, fix them, but I go, if you continue to do that, you'll never hit 10 million in sales in a year. I go, you have to get rid of those positions, because he's also doing an MBA that's across the country. He lives in Alaska. The MBA is at Cornell. Sometimes they have some physical meetings. Plus, he's traveling to conferences because he's the CEO, obviously. He had a conference in Spain. He's got a conference in Atlanta. He's, all over the world traveling to conferences. Plus, he's got a wife and a little kid. And, like, how are you going to have time for sales and marketing and product and building the company? And they acquired a company a year ago because it was synergy. Some of the clients that they had were also clients of this other business. And, so that there's synergy on both ends. So that helps with revenue, but they absorbed the team. And so the team's now under the rest of the company, even though they're kind of doing their own thing. They're like a unit. I'm like, I don't know where you think you have the energy. Like, the guy's doing it, but I think I'm like, if you got rid of those 3 things, you would probably hit 20 million in a year. Like, you would probably double or more in a year or 2 max.
Is he looking into EOS at all?
They had someone come in and do training with them, and they tried to move some team members around into the different positions, but it didn't work out with those people. Yeah.
I think the operating system works extremely well, but it might also highlight where you don't have the right people in the right seats. So it can be challenging.
Well, I said to him, I go, you can't be in multiple seats. That's the whole point of the system. You can be in one seat.
You look at the way they handle quarterly rocks, you should never have more than 3 special projects per quarter. So you can't own all the special projects either.
Like, if you're going to be in charge of sales, hire a CEO. If you're going to be in marketing, hire a CEO, hire a salesperson. If you want to be the CEO, hire for those other 3 parts. Like, but you can't have 2 seats. I go, EOS is about having the right person in the right seat, not having the right person in the right seats. So you're only allowed 1 seat, man. I'm like, I love you very much and I want you to succeed, but you're doing it wrong. I go, I've never had a team of this size. I've never seen this kind of success sustainably. So, like, fine, I get it. But I can also see things that you can't see or you're not willing to see. So I totally get it. And I tell him every time I see him, every time I talk to him, I'm like, I keep hammering him on, like, these things are great, but you're not there yet, and you know why.
I kept trying to let go of owning too much, and then kept getting pulled back in. So we had to bring in that additional leadership to prevent me getting pulled back in certain areas too. So it's hard. It's hard to get right. It's a concept that we can talk about and people can embrace. It's hard to get right. It's work.
I was accused of taking on too much with my own startup, and I hired a product manager, I hired a marketing director, I hired a COO. So in the beginning, it was just me and the CTO, and we hired all those people. And I felt like I had done such a good job that I felt bored, and I felt guilty as if I wasn't doing enough. And that was a big problem for me. And then I tried to do more, and they're like, "No, stop." They're like, "You're doing fine. Just stop. Just make sure we have enough money to pay salaries. That's your job."
That's your job. Yeah. Yeah. It is an interesting shift when you go from being a high performer on the execution team and even owning a lot of that during those early stages of a business. You have to wear all the hats until you can backfill your position, until you have that revenue flowing in that you can backfill and make those good hires. Um, but it is a tough transition to move out of being on the delivery team. It took me a long time getting comfortable not directing and assisting with product owners, project managers, and clients. One of my unique skills, probably similar to yours, is that one of my business partner or CTO, what he would say is, if you've got an idea, take it to Matt. He'll punch more holes in that bucket than anybody. I ask the challenging questions. I uncover where the problems might happen or where the opportunities might exist and go beyond just the conversation of what somebody wants. And so you need somebody like that on the team. And I love doing that because I could help the clients get more value and sometimes figure out where the real value was and focus on that first, in those areas first, or de-risking the investment by offering feasibility studies because I could see patterns. I can see where the challenges might occur. And I loved contributing that way to the team. So starting to let go of that and relying on others to do that, it was tough. I'm in a good spot now, but that's hard.
That's the thing I love as well. Like I said earlier, when someone tells me they have an idea, I love to tear it apart because they're only seeing the idea, they're not seeing how it could fail. And so if you're not willing to see how it could fail, you shouldn't start anything. And a lot of people say, I have an idea, I'm going to do it, I'm going to go full force, but they don't think about the potential ways that it could fail.
You got to think about that in order to de-risk or identify maybe where the challenges are. And I know we don't have a ton of time, but we've got so many great experiences where we helped clients zero in where the risk is. Do that body of work first. Make sure that that's not going to be an issue that you can't overcome. Then you make the larger investment. And sometimes it's with tech, IoT projects, things like that. They'll make a lot of assumptions about somebody else's hardware. They'll make a lot of assumptions about other platforms' APIs. They'll make a lot of assumptions about what the market's really going to care about, but that's more a market research challenge. But on the technical side of things, it's amazing the assumptions that people will make. And we like to zero in on those first and say, well, let's do a feasibility study. Let's make sure that what you're theorizing is true. There's a lot of challenges people run into with APIs provided by third-party organizations. They assume that platform is everything you can do in that platform, you should be able to communicate back and forth for those features through an API. Oftentimes it's not true. The API can be very limited, or an API might even have throttling. You can only make so many calls in a 24-hour period. You're not going to get data in real time. Well, if real-time data is a requirement for your vision to work, and real-time data is not really going to be available, what's the contingency plan? Do you change the way that you communicate your offer to the market? Do you change the way you handle pricing? Probably both of those things would be true. That doesn't mean you don't move forward with the vision, but you at least know what the technical limitations are. So anyway, you can see I'm kind of geeking out because it's those little subtleties that I expect my team to be able to uncover as well now that I'm not specifically in that role. it's hard to let go.